The hallway was a sterile tube of fluorescent light and recycled air, smelling faintly of industrial cleaner and indifference. It was the kind of corridor that existed in 1,000 identical buildings on 100 identical bases, a place designed for transit, not lingering. Yet, 2 Marines had chosen it as their stage. They stood shoulder to shoulder, a human roadblock clad in crisp desert marpat, their youth and unearned confidence radiating like a heat shimmer. The woman approaching them was their opposite. Her movements were economical, her presence muted. She wore a simple, slate-gray polo shirt and tactical trousers, the anonymous uniform of a contractor or a visiting inspector. In her hand, she carried a data slate, its screen dark. Her hair was pulled back in a severe, functional bun, and her face was a study in neutrality. She was, by all appearances, unremarkable, a piece of administrative background noise. The one with sergeant's chevrons on his collar puffed out his chest, a smirk playing on his lips. His companion, a corporal, mirrored the expression. They were young, fit, and bored, a dangerous combination on a remote training base where the primary currency was perceived toughness. "Lost, ma'am?" the sergeant asked. The ma'am was a splinter of sarcasm, meant to needle, not respect. The woman stopped a few feet away. Her eyes, a pale, washed-out blue, swept over them once. It was not a glance of intimidation or fear, but of simple assessment. She registered the tautness in their shoulders, the slight swagger in their stances, the way they held their hands just loose enough to seem casual but were coiled with adolescent aggression. She catalogued it all in less than a second and filed it away. She said nothing. Her silence was a vacuum, and the sergeant rushed to fill it. "This is the command deck. Authorized personnel only," he said, gesturing vaguely with his chin. "Admin and support are in building 4. Big sign out front. Can't miss it." He was trying to be helpful in the most insulting way possible. He was categorizing her, putting her in a box labeled harmless paper pusher, and directing her to where she belonged. The woman's gaze remained steady. She shifted her weight slightly, a minute adjustment of her center of gravity that went unnoticed by the 2 Marines but would have been read as a clear signal by anyone who knew what to look for. She took a half step to her left, preparing to simply walk around them. The corporal shifted to block her again. He was bolder now, feeding off his superior's energy. He barked a short, sharp phrase, a unit mantra he'd probably heard in a movie. "Pain is weakness. Move it or lose it." It was absurdly theatrical, a line delivered with the misplaced intensity of a teenager playing soldier. They both grinned, expecting a reaction. Fluster, anger, maybe a stammered apology. They got none of it. The woman's expression did not change. She held their gaze for another beat, then her eyes flickered past them, down the long, empty corridor. She seemed to be looking at something far away. Then, with a quiet fluidity that was almost unnerving, she sidestepped the corporal's clumsy block and continued down the hall. She didn't hurry. Her pace was exactly the same as it had been before. The sound of her soft-soled boots on the linoleum was a steady, rhythmic whisper that faded as she walked away. The 2 Marines stood dumbfounded for a moment, their little power play having fizzled into nothing. "What's her deal?" the corporal muttered, watching her retreating back. The sergeant just shrugged, the smirk returning to his face, though it was a little less certain this time. "Whatever. Just another pencil pusher from HQ. Let's go. Gunny Reyes will have our hides if we're late for muster." They turned and swaggered off in the opposite direction, the encounter already forgotten, a meaningless ripple in their day. The woman, Warrant Officer 5 Anna Petrova, didn't look back. The encounter was not forgotten. It was data, pointless, posturing aggression from junior NCOs. It was a symptom of a command climate, and she was here to diagnose the disease. She arrived at the heavy door of the Tactical Operations Center and pressed the cipher-locked entry pad. The light flashed green, and she stepped inside. The air in the TOC was frigid and hummed with the sound of servers and cooling fans. A massive screen dominated the far wall, displaying a topographical map of the sprawling desert training area, dotted with friendly and simulated enemy icons. In the center of the room, a man who could only be the base commander, Colonel Madsen, was holding court. He was a bull of a man, with a florid face and a voice that was permanently set to parade ground volume. "Readiness is an attitude," he boomed, gesturing at the screen with a meaty hand. "And here at Fort Irwin, our attitude is one of lethal, uncompromising excellence. We are sharper, faster, and more deadly than any other unit in the Corps. Period. Full stop." A collection of junior officers and senior NCOs stood around the central console, nodding in agreement. A young lieutenant, his name tag reading Davies, scribbled furiously in a notebook, his expression one of rapt adoration. Petrova's eyes, however, were drawn to a figure standing in the back, away from the sycophantic cluster. He was a master gunnery sergeant, his face a roadmap of desert deployments, his posture ramrod straight but relaxed. His arms were crossed over his chest, and his eyes, dark and intelligent, were fixed on the colonel with an expression of profound weariness. His name tag read, Reyes. Madsen finally noticed her standing just inside the door. His monologue faltered for a second. "Can I help you?" he barked, his tone suggesting the answer was no. "Warrant Officer Petrova, sir," she said, her voice quiet but clear, easily cutting through the electronic hum. "Inspector General's office. I'm here for the pre-exercise readiness audit." Madsen's face tightened. An audit, a box-checking exercise, a waste of his valuable time, right? "The bean counter," he said, not even trying to hide his disdain. He waved a dismissive hand. "Major Thompson, my XO, will get you squared away. Give her a data slate, find her a corner to sit in. Just try to stay out of the way of the real work, Warrant Officer." "Yes, sir," Petrova said. Her face betrayed nothing. She was a ghost, a functionary, a necessary annoyance. That was the role he had assigned her, and for now it suited her perfectly. Major Thompson, a man with the perpetually harried look of someone trying to please an impossible boss, handed her a standard-issue data slate and pointed to a small workstation in the corner. "Everything you need should be accessible from there, Warrant Officer. Let me know if you run into any firewalls." "I will," she said, knowing she wouldn't. As she walked to the corner, she passed Master Gunnery Sergeant Reyes. Their eyes met for a fraction of a second. He gave her a slow, almost imperceptible nod. It wasn't a greeting. It was an acknowledgement. He had seen the way the junior NCOs treated her in the hall. He saw everything, and he had seen the way Madsen dismissed her. And in her flat, unreadable expression, he saw something other than a bureaucrat. He saw a professional. Petrova sat down, the worn fabric of the chair sighing under her weight. She plugged her own encrypted slate into the workstation, its customized interface blooming to life. She didn't begin with the personnel files or the readiness reports Madsen was so proud of. She started with the system diagnostics. She pulled up maintenance logs for the TOC's HVAC system. She noted the fine layer of dust coating the server racks, a sign of lazy filter cleaning. A clogged filter meant reduced airflow. Reduced airflow meant higher operating temperatures. Higher temperatures led to component failure. It was a simple, logical chain of causality that a commander obsessed with lethal attitude would never even think to consider. She listened to Madsen continue his briefing, his voice a confident, booming drone. He spoke of operational readiness rates at 98%. Petrova's fingers moved silently across her screen, pulling the raw data from the motor pool's maintenance database. The numbers told a different story. Dozens of vehicles were listed as fully mission-capable, yet their logs showed overdue services, recurring faults for transmission slippage, and critical parts that had been on backorder for months. The 98% was a fiction, a number massaged and manipulated for a PowerPoint slide. She cross-referenced ammunition inventories. The official report, signed by Madsen himself, showed a full complement of ordnance for the upcoming live-fire exercise. But the Armory's daily expenditure logs, the ones buried 3 layers deep in the system, showed a significant shortfall in 556mm tracer rounds and guidance components for the target drones. They were cooking the books. She asked one question, timing it for a brief lull in Madsen's monologue. Colonel, my preliminary data shows a potential discrepancy in the guidance fin inventory for the MQ-27 drone series. Can you confirm the last physical audit of Lot 7B? The question was precise, technical, and utterly unexpected from the bean counter in the corner. The TOC went quiet. Davies looked up from his notebook, confused. Madsen's face flushed a deep, angry red. We run a tight ship here, warrant officer, he snapped, his voice tight with irritation. Our logistics are streamlined for maximum combat effectiveness. We don't have discrepancies. It wasn't an answer. It was a threat, a warning to stay in her lane. Petrova simply looked at him, her expression unchanging. Understood, sir. She turned back to her screen, leaving the colonel to stew in the sudden tension that filled the room. Across the TOC, she saw Reyes subtly shake his head, a gesture of disgust meant for no one but himself. He knew exactly what she had found. He knew the ship was rotten, and the captain was painting over the rust, and he knew a storm was coming. The next 36 hours were a quiet, methodical descent into the base's institutional decay. Petrova moved through the facility like a phantom, her gray polo a cloak of invisibility. She spoke to mechanics in the motor pool, comms technicians in the signal shack, armorers in the dimly lit concrete bunkers of the ammunition supply point. She didn't interrogate them. She asked simple, direct questions and listened, not just to their words, but to their hesitations. A young lance corporal in the motor pool, his hands stained with grease, admitted under her patient, non-judgmental questioning that they'd been instructed to sign off on the paperwork for 3 Humvees that had known electrical faults. Colonel's orders, ma'am. He said he needed them on the line for the exercise. Said we could fix them proper next week. In the comm center, a sergeant showed her a bank of tactical radios, their firmware 2 versions out of date. The patch was available, but installing it required taking the primary net down for 4 hours. The colonel wouldn't approve the downtime, the sergeant mumbled, avoiding her eyes. Said it would hurt our operational uptime stats. Everywhere she went, the story was the same. A culture of fear, presided over by a commander who valued the appearance of readiness over the reality of it. Metrics were king, and any truth that contradicted the perfect numbers was suppressed. The shortcuts were piling up, creating a lattice of latent failures, a system waiting for a single critical shock to shatter completely. Master Gunnery Sergeant Reyes found her in the mess hall late that night. She was sitting alone, nursing a cup of black coffee, her data slate on the table beside her. The room was mostly empty, the quiet punctuated by the clatter of trays in the kitchen. Reyes slid into the chair opposite her without an invitation. He placed his own coffee mug on the table. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. He's going to get someone killed tomorrow, Reyes said finally, his voice a low rumble. He wasn't looking at her, but at the swirling steam rising from his mug. Petrova didn't feign ignorance. The drones. Reyes nodded. The MQ-27s. They're running a new targeting software. An experimental build. It hasn't been fully vetted, but the contractor gave the colonel a glowing report, and he wants to show it off. The exercise is being streamed to a general back at Pendleton. The guidance fin inventory, she stated. Lot 7B was flagged for microfractures 3 weeks ago, Reyes confirmed. The whole batch was supposed to be grounded, but that would have meant filing a critical equipment failure report. So the paperwork got lost. They're on the drones for tomorrow's run. A confluence of failures, untested software, faulty hardware, and a command climate that punished honesty. Petrova felt a cold knot tighten in her stomach. It was a familiar feeling, the quiet dread that preceded disaster. The comms are spotty in Sector Gamma 7, where the main objective is, Reyes continued. The repeaters out there haven't been properly calibrated since the last sandstorm. Told the comms officer, who told the major, who told the colonel. The colonel said it was an acceptable risk. There's no such thing, Petrova said, her voice barely a whisper. There are only calculated risks and gambles. This is a gamble. He's gambling with my Marines, Reyes said, his voice hardening. For the first time, he looked directly at her, his dark eyes searching her face. Your IG. Your report can nail him to the wall. But it'll be after the fact. After someone pays the price. Petrova met his gaze. I am logging everything, Master Gunnery Sergeant. I know you are, he said. He stood up, his coffee untouched. Just be ready, he walked away, leaving her alone in the echoing silence of the mess hall. She looked down at her data slate, at the neat columns of data that painted a terrifying picture of imminent failure. Her job was to observe and report. But she knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that tomorrow, her job would be something else entirely. The desert sun was a merciless hammer blow the next morning. From her designated observer station in the TOC, Petrova watched the massive wall screen as the exercise began. The icons representing Marine units moved across the map in neat, orderly lines. It was a clean, sterile representation of a dirty, chaotic business. Colonel Madsen was in his element. He strode back and forth behind the main console, a conductor orchestrating his symphony of simulated war. He barked orders into his headset, his voice laced with theatrical urgency. Predator 1, you are weapons-free on all hostile targets in Sector Bravo. I want effects on target, people. Make it rain. Lieutenant Davies stood beside him, a faithful acolyte, relaying commands and updating the digital map. The air was thick with the smell of ozone and nervous sweat. Reyes stood at his post near the communications array, his face an impassive mask, but Petrova could see the tension in the set of his jaw. The first domino fell at 9:17. Sir, Predator 3 is reporting intermittent comms. A young communications officer announced, her voice tight. They're in Gamma 7. It's atmospheric interference. Madsen snapped, waving a dismissive hand. Tell them to maintain course and objective. Don't let them get distracted. Reyes caught Petrova's eye across the room. The gamble had begun. At 9:22, a frantic voice crackled over the net, breaking through a wall of static. Have a visual on a hostile drone, designation unknown. It's not on the flight plan. It's heading for the observation post at Eagle's Nest. All drones are on the flight plan, Madsen insisted, his face beginning to flush. Tell them to check their scopes. It's a friendly. Negative, sir, the voice shouted, now laced with panic. It's making an attack run. On the screen, a new icon blinked into existence. A red diamond, labeled Unknown, was moving at high speed toward a blue circle marked OP1, the untested software. It was misidentifying friendlies. Then the second domino fell. At 9:24, 3 more red diamonds appeared on the map, breaking away from their designated patrol routes. They were the MQ-27s, the ones with the faulty guidance fins. What the hell are those drones doing? Major Thompson demanded, his voice cracking. Get the drone operator on the line, Madsen roared. Tell him to reroute them. That's an order. A technician at the drone control station shook his head, his face pale. Sir, they're not responding to commands. They're flying erratically. It looks like a total guidance failure. The faulty fins, the microfractures were causing catastrophic flight instability under high-G maneuvers. The drones were now unguided missiles, armed with marking ammunition but weighing over 200 pounds and moving at 200 miles per hour. One of the red diamonds veered sharply, heading not for a target on the range, but directly for the base itself. Directly for the TOC. Sir, that drone is on a direct vector for our primary comms tower. Davies yelled, his voice a terrified squeak. The third domino, the one that would bring the whole house down. The TOC was a sealed, windowless box, but they all heard the sound. A high-pitched, rising scream of a failing engine, followed by a deafening crash and the shriek of tortured metal. The lights flickered once, twice, and then died. The massive wall screen went black. The hum of the servers wound down into an eerie silence. They were plunged into absolute darkness and chaos. For a heartbeat, the only sound was the sharp, terrified intake of breath from a dozen throats. Then the emergency lights kicked on, bathing the room in a hellish, pulsating red glow. The backup generators should have started, but there was only silence. The pencil-whipped maintenance logs had finally submitted their invoice. Panic erupted. Shouts echoed in the confined space. People were stumbling in the crimson gloom, bumping into consoles and each other. "What's happening? Get the lights on. The net is down. I've got nothing but static." Colonel Madsen's voice rose above the din, but it was no longer the voice of a confident commander. It was the shrill, cracking shout of a man who had lost control. "Somebody get me a report. Now." What was that? Where is my situational awareness? Davies was fumbling with a flashlight, its beam cutting a frantic, useless path across the dark screens. I don't know, sir. All systems are offline." The primary comms tower was down. The power grid was severed. The backup systems had failed. The units in the field were blind, deaf, and being hunted by rogue drones. On top of the training exercise, they now had a real-world mass casualty event in the making. The TOC, the nerve center of the entire operation, was a tomb. And in the center of the chaos, a single figure began to move with calm, deliberate purpose. Warrant Officer Anna Petrova stood up from her corner workstation. The red emergency strobes cast shifting shadows across her face, making it impossible to read her expression. In the suffocating panic of the sealed room, her stillness was a gravitational force. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. "Master Gunnery Sergeant," she said, her tone level and cool. It cut through the noise like a surgeon's scalpel. Reyes, who had been trying to get a field telephone working, froze and turned toward the sound. "Get me a hard line to the range control tower. Use the tertiary comms panel behind maintenance access plate 7. It's independently powered." Her instruction was so specific, so certain, that Reyes didn't question it. He simply nodded. On it, he moved with the swift efficiency of a man given a clear, achievable task. "Lieutenant Davies," Petrova continued, her voice unwavering. Davies, still fumbling with his flashlight, looked up, his eyes wide with fear in the red gloom. "Get the analog battle board and grease pencils. Emergency lighting is in the bottom drawer of the primary console. Set it up in the center of the room. Now!" The order galvanized him. He stopped panicking and moved to obey. Colonel Madsen finally found his voice, sputtering with rage and confusion. "Who in the hell do you think you are? I am in command here. I give the orders." Petrova didn't even look at him. She was already moving toward her gear bag, which she had placed neatly beside her workstation. She pulled out a small, ruggedized laptop, its casing scarred from use in places far rougher than this air-conditioned room. She walked to a small, forgotten panel on the wall, one that housed deep system diagnostic ports. She flipped open the cover, produced a specific cable from her pocket, and plugged the laptop in. The port had its own uninterruptible power supply, a fact she knew from her detailed study of the TOC schematics, a study Madsen would have dismissed as pointless administrative trivia. The laptop screen flared to life, its cold white light a stark contrast to the pulsating red of the room. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, typing lines of code with a speed that was mesmerizing. She wasn't navigating a user interface. She was speaking the machine's native language. "What are you doing?" Madsen demanded, taking a blustering step toward her. "That's a secured network port. I'm establishing a direct satellite uplink," Petrova said without looking up from her screen. Her voice was flat, devoid of any emotion except focus. "Bypassing your fried central server and compromised network. I am going to talk to your people in the field. You have failed to do so." The sheer audacity of her statement, the complete and total usurpation of his authority, left Madsen speechless. He stood there, his mouth hanging open, a useless monument to his own incompetence. Reyes returned, holding a field telephone handset. "I have range control, ma'am." The ma'am was no longer sarcastic or dismissive. It was pure, unadulterated respect. Petrova took the handset, cradling it between her shoulder and ear while her fingers continued to dance across the keyboard. Range control. This is Observer, she said into the phone, her voice dropping into a clipped, professional cadence. It was a different voice now, colder, harder, imbued with an authority that had nothing to do with the rank on a uniform she wasn't wearing. Call sign Spectre. Authenticate Sierra November 7-5. I am assuming tactical control of this net. Acknowledge. There was a pause on the other end. In the TOC, the only sounds were the frantic scratching of Davy's grease pencil on the analog map, the clicking of Petrova's keyboard, and the heavy, panicked breathing of Colonel Madsen. Then a voice came back over the handset, clear and professional. Authentication confirmed. Spectre. We read you 5x5. The net is yours. What are your orders? Madsen's face went white. He stumbled back as if struck. Spectre. It was a name whispered in after-action reports that were classified before the ink was dry. A ghost call sign from the shadowy world of special operations, a name synonymous with fixing the unfixable, usually in the most violent way possible. Reyes looked at Petrova, and a lifetime of experience clicked into place. The quiet confidence, the unnerving calm, the way she had assessed those belligerent NCOs in the hallway. He hadn't just seen a professional. He'd seen a predator. While Madsen and his XO stared in stunned silence, a new reality dawning on them, Lieutenant Davies was having his own revelation. Tasked by the bewildered Major Thompson to find out who the hell she is, Davies had managed to get a single, sputtering terminal on the internal server to work. He typed in her name, Petrova, Anna. Well, 5. Her Inspector General profile came up first. Standard, boring. But a small, hyperlinked icon next to her name read, Primary Service Record, LVL 7 Clearance REQ. On a desperate hunch, he clicked it. Access was denied, but a header page loaded. It was 99% redacted, black lines obscuring a career spent in the shadows. But a few fragments were visible through the digital ink. Unit. Joint Special Operations Command. Special Activities Division. Qualifications. Master Explosive Ordnance Disposal, EOD. Technician. Master Breacher. Advanced Network Warfare. Awards. Silver Star. Bronze Star W/V Device. 3. Purple Heart. 2. Davies felt the blood drain from his face. He looked from the terrifying, fragmented resume on the screen to the woman who was now the calm, undisputed center of the entire room. She was issuing orders with a quiet, lethal precision, her voice the only source of order in the universe. Predator 3, this is Spectre. Do you copy? She said into the handset, her eyes locked on her laptop screen, which now displayed a raw data map of the area, fed directly from the satellite. A voice weak with static came back. Spectre, this is Predator 3. We copy. Stop looking at your screens, Predator 3. They are lying to you. Give me your position relative to the large rock formation you call the Sleeping Giant. We are 1 click east of the giant's head. Good copy, Petrova said. You have a rogue drone approaching from your 6 o'clock, low altitude. It is not responsive. I need you to engage and destroy it with shoulder-fired munitions. Now. But, rules of engagement. The rules have changed, Predator 3. Petrova's voice was ice. The exercise is terminated. This is now a real-world threat. Engage. She was rewriting the entire operational plan on the fly, making life-or-death decisions in seconds. She turned to Reyes. Master Guns, I need a fire crew at the primary power conduit by the comms tower. There's a lithium battery fire. Standard suppression won't work. They need Class D extinguishers. And I need a medical team at Observation Post 1. 3 casualties, crush injuries and lacerations. She hadn't seen the fire or the casualties. She had inferred them from the nature of the drone crash and the power failure. Reyes just nodded and began relaying the orders on a secondary radio he had powered up. He didn't need to ask how she knew. He understood he was in the presence of a level of competence he had rarely seen. For the next hour, Petrova was the mind of the base. She systematically reestablished contact with every unit in the field, guiding them out of danger not with fancy technology, but with basic soldiering, using terrain features, compass headings, and her encyclopedic knowledge of their equipment's capabilities and limitations. She directed one squad to use their vehicle's laser designator to paint a rogue drone, allowing the range control tower to lock on with its own systems and send a remote self-destruct code. She talked another unit through manually rebooting their corrupted comms system, reciting the command prompts from memory. She turned the catastrophic failure into a textbook emergency response. Slowly, order emerged from the chaos. Maintenance crews, guided by Reyes, got a secondary generator online. The main lights flickered on, washing the room in their normal, sterile white, chasing away the hellish red. The wall screen remained dark, a dead monument to Madsen's hubris, but the babble of panicked voices on the radio had been replaced by the calm, professional reports of units who were now safe and accounted for. The TOC was a mess of discarded equipment and overturned chairs, but it was quiet. The immediate crisis was over. Colonel Madsen was slumped in his command chair, his face the color of ash. He looked shrunken, deflated. The bluster and bravado had been stripped away, leaving only a hollowed-out man who had been utterly and completely broken in his own command center. His authority had evaporated. Lieutenant Davies stood near the now useless analog map, his posture rigid. He wasn't looking at the colonel anymore. He was staring at Petrova with an expression of pure, unadulterated awe. He had just seen the difference between leadership and command, between competence and posture. The lesson was brutal, and he would never forget it. Petrova disconnected her laptop, coiling the cable with neat, practiced motions. She handed the telephone back to the comms tech. Her work was done. Master Gunnery Sergeant Reyes walked over to her. He picked up a fallen radio handset from the floor and placed it carefully back on its cradle. He looked at the warrant officer who had single-handedly saved his Marines and salvaged a catastrophe. He didn't offer thanks or praise. The moment was too raw, too profound for empty words. Instead, he simply met her eyes and gave a slow, deliberate nod. It was a gesture of absolute respect between two professionals, an acknowledgement of a shared standard of excellence. It was the highest compliment he could possibly pay. The next day, the base was a hive of activity. An official investigation team had arrived from Pendleton. Colonel Madsen had been formally relieved of command, escorted from his office by two grim-faced MPs. The atmosphere was somber, but beneath it was a current of relief. The toxic pressure that had permeated the base was gone. Anna Petrova was not in the TOC or in any of the formal debriefings. She was in a small, quiet room in the armory's maintenance bay. The air smelled of cleaning solvent and gun oil. In front of her, on a clean white cloth, lay the completely disassembled parts of a standard-issue M4 rifle. She had requested it from the armory an hour ago. She hadn't fired a weapon during the crisis. She hadn't needed to, but this was a necessary ritual. Her hands moved with a practiced, economical grace. She cleaned every component, the bolt carrier group, the firing pin, the star chamber, with a small brush and solvent. The rhythmic, mechanical sound of her work was the only noise in the room. Scrape, wipe, click. It was a process of control, of restoring order on a small, tangible scale. It was a meditation. Each piece had a function. Each function had a standard. When maintained, the system worked. When neglected, it failed. It was the same for a rifle as it was for a command. The door creaked open. Master Gunnery Sergeant Reyes stood there, holding two steaming ceramic mugs. He walked in without a word and placed one on the workbench beside her, its base making a soft clink on the metal. He leaned against the opposite wall, sipping from his own mug. Petrova didn't look up from her work. She picked up the bolt and slid it into the carrier, the finely machined parts moving together with a whisper of oiled steel. "Thanks, Master Guns," she murmured. "Any time, Spectre," he replied, the call sign a quiet statement of fact between them now. They stood in comfortable silence for a few minutes. Reyes finished his coffee. "Your report?" he asked. "It will be thorough," she replied, inserting the charging handle into the upper receiver. "I know it will," he said. He placed his empty mug on the bench and headed for the door. He paused before leaving. If you ever get tired of checking boxes, we could always use another warrant officer who knows which end of the rifle to point. A ghost of a smile touched Petrova's lips, a barely perceptible upturn at the corner of her mouth. I'll keep that in mind. Reyes nodded once and was gone. Petrova finished her work. The rifle was whole again, its matte black finish gleaming dully under the fluorescent lights. She worked the action, the sound a solid, satisfying clack-clack. Perfect function. Order restored. She set the weapon carefully aside. Then she picked up her data slate and activated the screen. A blank report template appeared. She typed the subject line, Preliminary Findings. Operational Readiness Failure, Fort Irwin. She paused, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. Then she began to write, her words as precise and methodical as the cleaning of the rifle. The first sentence was simple, direct, and utterly damning. The cold glow of the screen illuminated a face that was calm, focused, and professional. The face of a woman who had come to inspect the standards and had been forced to become them.